UFC 314 is just about a week away, which means it's time for me to go through and make my full card predictions. Going to be breaking down every single matchup on this fight card. Timestamps are going to be in the description if you guys want to jump around to certain matchups. Overall, just pretty pumped for UFC 314 here. Think it's a really strong main card, some fun matchups littered throughout this one. Would love to hear your thoughts down below. Drop your picks. But let's just dive right into the first matchup here. Wish we could say we're starting off with a bang. Probably not. We have Nora Cornolle taking on Hailey Cowan. I do think Cornolle is decently well-rounded. She's 2-1 in the UFC. Outstruck Melissa Mullins and Jocelyn Edwards in her first two UFC fights. The Melissa Mullins finish was actually pretty impressive. I think she hurt her with some knees to the body, followed up with some head kicks, got to finish there. Her most recent fight, she was outclassed by Jacqueline Cavalcanti on the feet, tried to go to the wrestling, went 1-for-9 on takedowns, lost that decision. On the other side here with Hailey Cowan, I expect her to come in and try to grapple. She was pretty grappling heavy on the Contender Series, won a close split decision. She lost her UFC debut, tried to initiate the grappling department, went 2-for-8 on takedowns. I don't think she's great at mixing in actually damaging strikes, where when she's grappling, she's just very focused on, the clinch, getting control, trying to get the opponent down. She's not great at, mixing in that ground and pound, landing some big shots in the clinch. She's also been out for almost 2 years here. She has one UFC fight, and she has pulled out of 3 different matchups with injuries. So just based on the inactivity, the fact that, she hasn't gotten over against UFC competition, I'm going to pick Cornolle here by decision. I could see this kind of being like a grimy, close fight with not a ton of big moments, but I will lean towards Cornolle here to get it done by decision. Now, this next fight, pretty fun. We have Tresean Gore taking on Marco Tulio. Tresean Gore actually returned this past November after a 2+ year layoff. He has back-to-back wins by guillotine, and the man does have a nasty guillotine. I think it was against Josh Frem. He had that thing locked in. It looked like Frem's head was going to pop off. It was so tight. He was definitely viewed as kind of like a striker, power puncher heading into the UFC. Within the UFC, he's really relied more on his grappling. He's still very raw, pretty unproven, only 5-3 as a pro, so still has a lot of room to grow here. Marco Tulio is very fun, and he is very dangerous. He is a powerful, explosive striker. 9 of his 13 wins are by knockout. He had a nasty spinning back kick to the body on the Dana White Contender Series. His opponent was throwing, I believe it was an overhand right. He, timed it perfectly, just crippled him to the body. And then in his UFC debut, he had a round 1 knockout win against Ihor Potieria. I just think Marco Tulio is the more polished guy. I don't think Tresean Gore is going to be able to come in and just ragdoll him, rack up control time on the ground. I don't think Tulio is going to be desperately shooting and putting himself in a position to get guillotined. So I think Tulio is going to get this one done on the feet. I'm going to go Marco Tulio round 2 knockout. Now we're going to be going all the way down to the flyweight weight class, where we have Sumudaerji taking on Mitch Raposo. Sumudaerji's kind of been on a rough stretch here. He has lost 3 straight fights, but against very legit competition. He had the absolute war against Matt Schnell, which he somehow managed to lose despite hurting him 4 or 5 times in that second round, and then also losses to Tim Elliott and Charles Johnson. Sumudaerji's a southpaw, has a laser left hand, mixes in some solid kicks. On the other side here with Mitch Raposo, he's definitely more of a grappler, has really kind of struggled against legit competition. He was on The Ultimate Fighter, lost his first fight on Tough, then he got a shot on the Contender Series, was submitted by Jake Hadley, then he made his UFC debut, lost to Andre Lima by decision, and now he's getting someone who is on a skid, but a skid against top competition, was just recently in the top 15. I just think Sumudaerji is going to be a little bit too clean in this matchup. I think he's going to be able to limit the wrestling of Raposo, and I think he picks up a decision win, keeping the range on the feet. Now we are going to go up to 185, where we have Sedriques Dumas taking on Mikhail Oleksiejczuk. Dumas is 3-2 in the UFC, so pretty decent record, but he has a very, very soft strength of schedule. Nursultan Ruzaboyev is probably the best guy he's faced. That's one of his 2 losses. He also lost to Josh Frem, and then his wins, just pretty close to bottom of the barrel. Dennis Tululin, Abu Azaitar, and then Cody Brundage. Pre-UFC, he was more of a striker, very, kind of lethal finisher, finished 6 of his 7 wins. He has really shifted to relying on his grappling in the UFC, and we just haven't seen any finishing upside. All 3 of his wins are by decision. On the other side here with Mikhail Oleksiejczuk, he very well could be fighting for his job. He has 3 losses in a row. He has lost 4 of his last 5. But this man has faced some insane level of competition in the UFC. These are all his UFC losses. So he's lost 8 times in the UFC. Those have been against Shara Magomedov, Kevin Holland, Michel Pereira, Caio Borralho, Dustin Jacoby, Jimmy Crute, OSP, and then Khalil Roundtree. Like, he is not losing to one single bum, out of all those names. So that's, very tough comp. Most of those guys have been in the top 15 at some point. Some of those dudes have even higher ceilings, guys like Caio Borralho, Khalil Roundtree, OSP at one point was ranked much higher than that. Oleksiejczuk is a very solid striker. 14 of his 19 wins are by knockout. His weakness has definitely been his defensive grappling. 6 of his 9 losses are by submission. I think if this takes place on the feet, I do think Oleksiejczuk kind of chews him up there. The question is just going to be, can Sedriques Dumas come in and control grapple Michel Oleksiejczuk? I think it's possible, but I'm still going to lean towards Oleksiejczuk being able to keep this one standing. I'm going to pick him by knockout. We'll go round 2. I think he could get it done early. Round 2 KO for Mikal. Then we're going to go to featherweight, where we have Darren Elkins taking on Julian Erosa. And Darren Elkins, at the age of 40 years old, with his style, is somehow still picking up UFC wins. He has won 3 of his last 4, coming off of back-to-back wins. He's a guy who's going to go out. He's going to rely on his durability, his gas tank, and he's honestly just going to go out there and try to outdog his opponent. And, he's had a lot of success doing that throughout his career, even into his, late 30s, now 40s, which is crazy considering he does rely on that durability. He's also just going to push a relentless wrestling pace. And unless someone's going to go out there and just consistently hurt him, get him out of there, he is probably going to be the guy that's, looking good end of the second round, into the third round, kind of winning those later minutes. On the other side here with Julian Erosa, he is really making the most of his 3rd UFC stint. Very rare to see someone get 3 different shots in the UFC, but in his first one, he went 1-1. In his second stint, he went 0-3. At that point, you're looking like 1-4 in the UFC across 2 stints. Probably not looking great to get back in. He does get back in, and since then he has gone 7-3. So 70% win rate since getting that 3rd shot. He's coming off of back-to-back guillotine wins against Christian Rodriguez and Ricardo Ramos. That C-Rod win was very impressive because that was like in the middle of him just pretty much humbling every single top prospect at 135 and 145. Erosa shut that down. He also has some quality wins against Sean Woodson, Nate Landwehr, Charles Jourdain, Hakeem Dawodu. He has a huge frame for 145. He's 6'1" with a 74.5-inch reach. He is a dangerous finisher, 11 KO wins, 14 submission wins. He's also doing it at the UFC level. 5 of his 8 UFC wins are by finish. I think Erosa's biggest issue is just his durability. 7 of his 11 pro losses are by knockout. 5 of his 7 UFC losses are by KO. And then he has been dropped in 9 of his 15 UFC fights. So you are not someone who wants to be hurt, kind of wounded in there with a guy like Darren Elkins, who's just going to consistently lay on the ground and pound, put the pace on you. But I also just don't think that Darren Elkins has like the power on the feet to truly scare me about Erosa's durability. So I am predicting a Julian Erosa finish in this matchup. I just think he's the much younger guy, kind of, much closer to his prime. I've gone back and forth on submission or knockout. I do think Elkins could run into that guillotine. He could make it 3 in a row, but Elkins has also been just super defensively responsible, from a jiu-jitsu perspective. He's only been subbed 1 time in his career, and that was against Charles Oliveira, which, kind of an exception there. So I'm going to lean towards knockout. I'll go Julian Erosa round 1 KO. We have seen Elkins, even, recently, get kind of starched like Cub Swanson and just beat him up on the feet for like half a round, got a round 1 finish. I think it could be a similar fight to that here with Julian Erosa. Now, up 1 weight class, we have Jim Miller taking on Chase Hooper. And unfortunately for Jim Miller, this does kind of seem like they're feeding the veteran to the up-and-coming prospect. Hooper's 25 years old. He's on a 4-fight win streak. 3 of those are by finish, 3 straight finishes. He had the armbar against Clay Guida. He had the Darce against Slavoclaws, and then he had a rear naked choke against Jordan Levitt. He's a fun grappler. Great submission offense. I do think his ground and pound's really developing. We saw that in the Slavoclaws fight. Was really able to mix, the damage on the ground with his submission offense. And when he's grappling, he's able to push an insane pace. It's kind of like his domain. So if you're a striker, you can strike for, 10, 15 rounds. Chase Hooper can pretty much grapple forever if that's where the fight's going to take place. He's still fairly raw on the feet, not super defensively responsible, but the grappling is obviously his bread and butter. Jim Miller is coming off a submission win against Damon Jackson. He has a really nice guillotine, which could potentially come into play in this matchup in the UFC. He's also kind of unlocked some power within the last few years. Kind of rare for a guy to hit like his later 30s and all of a sudden just start nuking dudes. But in his first 37 UFC fights, he had 2 knockout wins. In his last 8, he has 3. So more KO wins in his last 8 fights than his first 37 in the promotion. He's also 6-2 in his last 8, but when he has kind of stepped up in the level of competition, that's kind of where he's fallen. His losses are to Bobby Green and Alexander Hernandez. I'm a little bit worried about the takedown defense. He's sub 50% at 49%. I just think Chase Hooper's control, his submission offense is so dangerous. I don't think he's going to run into the gilly, even though Jim Miller does have a great one. And I kind of just think Chase Hooper's going to have his way on the ground here. Now, maybe Hooper overextends on the feet. Jim Miller catches him. It's not impossible. Like I said, Hooper is a little bit reckless on the feet, but I'm going to go with Chase Hooper by round 2 sub. Now we have, I think, the second women's fight on this card. We have Xiaonan taking on Virna Jandiroba. This is a pretty clear striker versus grappler matchup. I want to give a shout out to Xiaonan because I think she had one of like the quickest and most extreme grappling improvements that I can remember. In 2021, she was booked against Carla Esparza. Carla Esparza just took her down and beat the crap out of her. Like Carla Esparza, not someone who's known for having like nasty ground and pound. Esparza truly beat the brakes off of Xiaonan, and a year later, in 2022, Xiaonan was winning a 5-round decision against Mackenzie Dern in a spot where she was controlled for at least a couple of rounds, showcased, great defensive ability to not get submitted, and it's just rare to see that type of, improvement that quickly. I will say, like, Zhang Weili had success in the grappling, but, like, Zhang Weili is a different animal. She was ragdolling Tatiana Suarez. Like, she's just not comparable to anyone else in this weight class, so I'm not really going to count it against Xiaonan. Also, Xiaonan dropped her, so very dangerous on the feet. She has won 3 of her last 4, the only loss being the title shot against Weili. Virna's also on a roll here, 4 straight wins. She is a very impressive grappler. She's racked up at least 6 minutes of control time in her last 3 decision wins, and then her last fight was a submission win against Amanda Lemos. She has great jiu-jitsu. This seems like it's just a question of can Virna get the takedowns and control grapple. I think both have clear advantages, in their domains where they want to be. If this is a fight on the feet, Xiaonan should win. If this is a grappling match, it should go to Virna Jandiroba. I think this is going to be close. I think this could be like one of those fights where you have Virna with 2.5 minutes of control time and you're like, trying to figure out how much damage she did on the ground. How are you scoring that compared to, Xiaonan's work on the feet? So I do think it's going to be close. I'm going to slightly lean towards Xiaonan. I think she's shown enough that she's not just going to get completely dominated on the ground. I think she should be continuing to improve, and I do think there's just a clear edge on the feet. So Yan, by very close decision, is going to be my call there. Now, I believe this is the final fight on the prelims. We have Dan Ige taking on Sean Woodson. And this is kind of a crazy matchup. I think it's good matchmaking at featherweight, but there is just going to be an extreme size difference in this fight. Dan Ige, not a super small featherweight, but frame-wise, he is on the smaller side. He's 5'7", 71-inch reach. Sean Woodson is a massive 145er. The man is 6'2", with a 78-inch reach. Like, 6'2" is crazy. 78-inch reach is even wilder at the 145-pound weight class. Dan Ige, really clean boxing, has knockout power, has some nasty KO wins in the UFC against Andre Fili, Damon Jackson, Gavin Tucker. He kind of relied more on his wrestling and submission offense early on in his career. Now it's pretty much almost entirely on the feet. Like, he just wants to go out there and stand and bang. And he's this interesting example of someone who has really kind of struggled once he's faced like that top 10 level competition, but has just consistently held his ranking in like the 10 to 15 area, where if he's having to fight outside the rankings, he is going to hold on to his spot. That's really what we've seen out of him. These are his last 12 fights. So he has beaten guys like Edson Barbosa, which I think was how he got into the top 15. Gavin Tucker, who was trying to break in there. Damon Jackson trying to break in. Nate Landwehr trying to break in. Andre Feely trying to break in. He's turning all these guys back. And, 3 of those by knockout. The Nate Landwehr one was a clear decision. The Barbosa one, very, very competitive fight. But then you look at his losses. Calvin Kattar was trying to move up. Korean Zombie was trying to move up. Josh Emmett trying to move up. Evloev, Bryce Mitchell, Diego Lopes, Lerone Murphy. That was the one where they were kind of in the same range, but Murphy's obviously on the rise as like a top prospect. So he's really just kind of settled into like right in the top 15, but not quite top 10 caliber. For Sean Woodson, he's going to use that large frame very well. He fights from, his distance, good jab, solid kicks, good knees, works the body pretty well. Has pretty clean boxing for someone that maybe to expect to be like super kickboxing heavy. He has kind of lacked that finishing upside in the UFC. Only 2 of his 7 UFC wins are by knockout. 5 decision wins. I just think this is a super interesting matchup. I could totally see Sean Woodson just staying on the outside, picking at Dan Ige, kind of outpointing him for 15 minutes. I could also see Dan Ige just capitalizing on a Woodson mistake and just absolutely nuking him. Although Woodson's only been dropped twice in the UFC, I think it was the same fight. I do think the durability may be a little bit of a concern. I'm going to lean towards Dan Ige here. I think it's very competitive. I think Dan Ige is someone who carries that power late in fights. If Woodson's, just making minor mistakes and maybe he starts to slow down a little bit towards the end, I do think Ige could capitalize. So I'm going to go with Dan Ige round 2 knockout, but I love the matchmaking here. I think it's a super interesting fight that's probably going to take place on the feet. Now, kicking off the main card, we have Nikita Krylov taking on Dominick Reyes. Krylov has kind of been MIA over the last couple of years. This is over a 2-year layoff. And what I thought was so crazy is Nikita Krylov is only 32 years old. It seems like this dude's been, fighting the best of the best for a very long time. And he might only be entering his prime at this point. Since 2017, Krylov's only losses are to Magomed Ankalaev, current champion, Glover Teixeira, former champion, Jan Blachowicz, former champion, and then Paul Craig, who just magically has big time wins against every high level fighter. So he's really just losing to the best of the best. And then Paul Craig, he is kill or be killed. He has finished 28 of his 30 wins. He has 12 knockouts, 16 submissions, and then he has been finished in 7 of his 9 losses. He is very aggressive, can kind of run into submissions, does have a very good chin, only been knocked out once. And it was his UFC debut up at heavyweight. And it wasn't even like he got caught and finished. It was like he was just so unbelievably tired in the 3rd round that he was unable to defend ground and pound. So it wasn't even like a bad chin or him actually getting clipped cost him that fight. On the other side here with Dominick Reyes, he is coming off of back-to-back knockout wins against Dustin Jacoby and Anthony Smith. There were some serious questions about his chin after his 4-fight losing streak, where he had pretty much 3 brutal KOs in a row, and they almost just got worse and worse. Got knocked out by Jan Blachowicz, wasn't the worst thing in the world. Nasty spinning elbow out cold against Yuri Prochazka, and then the Ryan Spann fight, where he pretty much got hit with a power jab and just went out cold. So the chin has held up in the last couple of fights, hasn't gotten hit super clean, not like he's getting nuked and surviving, but he also has been touched in some of these fights and has looked fine. He's pretty much purely a striker, sharp straight lefts, he's a southpaw, solid body kicks. He fights well moving backwards. That's definitely something I noticed. Knocked out Chris Weidman, moving backwards, same thing in the Dustin Jacoby fight. I think this fight's a very tough call for me. The layoff for Krylov is also interesting. That could go one of 2 ways. Has he been injured? Has he been banged up? Why has he been out? Has he been out at the gym? Or is he just locking in for a couple of years, letting his body rest? There's just questions. I do think Krylov is probably the more well-rounded guy. Don't think he has the greatest offensive wrestling to get the fight to the ground, but he's definitely the better grappler. I also think he just has way more proven durability. But Reyes has been active. He has those recent wins. I can see Krylov kind of charging in, overextending, getting countered by Dominick Reyes like we saw in the Jacoby fight, in the Chris Weidman matchup. And then Dominick Reyes is pretty tough to take down, 82% takedown defense, also tough to just completely control on the ground. Like John Jones was struggling to control him. I don't really think Nikita Krylov's going to come in here after a 2+ year layoff and just start ragdolling Dominick Reyes. So I'm going to go with the underdog here. I'm going to pick Dominick Reyes by round 1 knockout. Maybe this is a mistake and I'm just like buying into fake durability where he's gotten through 2 fights. But I do think like if the chins were equal, I would be preferring Dominick Reyes in this matchup by a decent amount. So we're just banking that he doesn't get clipped early on. Like I said, might be a bad call, but I'm going to go Dom Reyes by round 1 knockout. Then continuing on with the main card here, we have a very fun featherweight fight between Yair Rodriguez and Patricio Pitbull. This is kind of like the rare big-time signing for the UFC. They really have not been going out trying to bring in guys from other promotions or even some of like the big-name young guys. So I do think it's cool they brought in Patricio Pitbull. If you guys are not familiar, the man's a Bellator legend, like potentially probably the Bellator GOAT, honestly. 24-6 in the promotion. He was a double champ, 145, 155. Actually tried to become a triple champ down at 135, but didn't go his way. He has 15 title wins in Bellator, has a KO win against Michael Chandler. I do think 145 is his best weight class. He's still going to be undersized, but frame-wise, I think it's where he fits in. He's 5'6" with a 65.5-inch reach. 5'6" isn't crazy, like you're kind of getting into like Volk, Ilya territory, but a 65.5-inch reach is like crazy short arms. Like you're seeing that number in like women's strawweight fights. Like for reference, Pitbull's very well-rounded, actually has 12 wins of each. So he has 12 knockout wins, 12 submission wins, 12 decision wins. He hits very, very hard, has been very durable throughout his career. I will say his second to last fight, it wasn't in Bellator. I think it was like one of their Ryzen crossover fights, but he was knocked out in that one. He is 37 years old. I don't think we're getting like Pitbull in his prime, but still a very good, very, very dangerous fighter. On the other side here with Yair, he is coming off of back-to-back losses, and he was finished in both of those fights. He was knocked out by Volk and then submitted by Brian Ortega, and I think he showed some major grappling deficiencies in both of those fights. I believe Volk took him down 7 times. Ortega, someone who has amazing jiu-jitsu, but is not known for his wrestling, second and I think third round, was just able to ragdoll him, pretty much got him where he wanted, and then found the finish. He is a very, very dangerous striker, amazing kicks, just has such a deep bag of techniques where he can just throw a ton at you. He has been out for a year plus. We'll see, how he looks coming in here. I think a few years ago, I probably would have leaned towards Pitbull, but I just think at this point in their careers, Pitbull getting up there in age, Yair taking the year off, I think he's going to be able to keep his range. The size difference is going to be real. 5'11", 71-inch reach for Yair. He definitely fights at his own range compared to 5'6" with like a 66-inch reach. I am going to lean towards Yair. I'll pick him by decision. I do think both guys are honestly live for a finish, but I'll lean towards Yair by decision. But, good to see Pitbull in the UFC, and also good to see the UFC actually making a play for one of these bigger named guys. Then we're going to have Bryce Mitchell taking on Jean Silva. Silva called for this fight. Bryce Mitchell accepted. Good to see this kind of step up here for John Silva. And this is really his opportunity to break into the rankings. He is 4-0 in the UFC, has knocked out all 4 of his opponents. And like a couple of solid names here, Drew Dober, Charles Jourdain, also has KO wins against Melsik Baghdasaryan. That was his most recent one. And then Weston Wilson. He's a slick striker, very powerful, good kicks, super explosive, has a nasty left hook. I do think he's still fairly unproven as a grappler. He was taken down 3 times by Charles Jourdain. Now, he was not controlled, but still getting taken down by Jourdain, not a great sign. Someone who's since moved down to 135, and I just don't think is a comparable grappler to Bryce Mitchell. Bryce Mitchell, on the other hand, is a great control grappler. In his last 5 wins, he has racked up 8 minutes, 30 seconds, 7 minutes, 30 seconds, 11.5 minutes, 10 minutes, and 13 minutes of control time. When he is winning fights, he is taking you down and he is holding you there. In his last 4, he has gone 2-2. He's been knocked out by Josh Emmett and then submitted by Ilia Topuria. Obviously, those are like the best of the best, especially Ilia Topuria. The Josh Emmett knockout was very brutal. I think Bryce Mitchell is a little bit underrated on the feet, but like in this matchup, he is going to need to get the takedowns. Like he is not outstriking Jean Silva in this matchup. So I'm going to lean towards Jean Silva. I think he finds a finish on the feet. It just seems like he is ready to ascend into that top 15. But I will say, like, John Silva, I think, is a larger than 3-1 favorite. That seems extreme in my opinion because we just have a little information on what his grappling skill set is. And if his takedown defense is not up to par, like Bryce Mitchell is going to punish him and could very easily win a decision or find a finish. So I do think Bryce Mitchell's live for an upset. If I was like placing a bet on this fight, looking at the odds, I'd probably be betting on Bryce Mitchell. But like, if the odds were even, I'm still going to pick John Silva in this matchup, and I'll go round 1 knockout. He's super fun. Would like to see him get the win here. Then in the co-main event, we have Michael Chandler taking on Paddy Pimblett. And for the co-main and the main, I have more in-depth breakdowns on my channel the last couple of videos if you guys want to see like the super in-depth breakdown for both these fights. But I think there are some key points to touch on here. Michael Chandler's kind of been on a rough stretch, lost 4 of his last 5. Back-to-back losses. On the other hand, Paddy Pimblett undefeated at 6-0 in the UFC. I do think age is going to be a factor in this matchup. Michael Chandler's 38 years old. He's likely regressing, and he's probably declining in both his athleticism and his durability. I just don't think at 38, getting into your late 30s, you are getting more athletic or you are getting more durable. It just wouldn't make any sense. On the other side here for Paddy, he's 30 years old, likely consistently improving. And we've only seen him for like under 4 minutes, like 3 minutes and 22 seconds since 2024. So he looked great against Bobby Green. We have no idea what he's leveled up to since then, which, he could be an even better version of the guy we saw submit Bobby Green, who already looked very good. I'm definitely going to give Chandler the striking edge in this matchup. I think you just look at his power. The dude hits like an absolute tank, and Paddy does have the tendency to leave his chin up in the air. And like that can cost you in any fight, like the Jared Gordon matchup. A couple of years ago, he was getting clipped very consistently by Jared Gordon, but especially against Michael Chandler, someone who just throws absolute bombs at you, can throw extended combinations where he's covering a lot of range. If you're like either coming in with your chin up or you're retreating with your chin up, like Chandler very easily could put Paddy Pimblett out if he still has that bad habit. On the other side, I think Paddy Pimblett has the grappling edge. He has great jiu-jitsu. Chandler has really struggled in the grappling department in his last couple of fights. Historically, had been someone who was a great defensive wrestler and grappler. He was submitted for the first time in his career by Dustin Poirier. And then Charles Oliveira, not someone who's known for his amazing wrestling. Obviously, his jiu-jitsu is top tier, but Oliveira went 5 for 12 on takedowns, racked up nearly 15 minutes of control time. So if Paddy can actually initiate grappling and land takedowns, that could be very, very problematic for Michael Chandler. And then looking at the 5-round aspect of this fight, this is a 5-round co-main event. Chandler just has way more 5-round experience. Believe he went 5 rounds 4 times in Bellator, just did it in the UFC. A lot of his 5-rounders haven't actually gone 5-rounders, but he's still been in preparation for those fights, been in camp for those kinds of matchups. So I am going to lean towards Michael Chandler here. I think Paddy's interesting. I do think this could be a spot where Chandler looks like a diminished version. I do think when you take the strategy of like, oh, he's looked really good in losses, sometimes that's not great, but I think he has enough juice here. I'm going to pick Michael Chandler by round 1 knockout. I just don't see the clear path for Paddy Pimblett, like cleanly winning this fight. Like, sure, Chandler could overextend, do something stupid. We know the fight IQ is bad, and maybe Paddy locks in some sort of submission, but like, I have a tough time seeing Paddy just consistently outstrike Chandler for 5 rounds. I don't trust Paddy's offensive wrestling to really like bank rounds or just like lock down control time in that way. So Chandler round 1 knockout is going to be the pick, but I'd be lying if I said I was like fully confident there. And then we have arrived at the main event. Like I said, also have a more in-depth breakdown on this one on the channel, but Alexander Volkanovski taking on Diego Lopes. I think a lot of people are sleeping on Diego Lopes in this matchup, and I'm not saying technically Diego Lopes is the better fighter. He certainly is not, but he has some very clear advantages in this matchup, and one of those is the power advantage. He went out, he knocked out Pat Sabatini in 1:30. He dropped Sadiq Youssef twice, finished him in 1:29. He hurt Brian Ortega badly on multiple occasions. And then also from the durability perspective, Diego Lopes has proven to be very durable. Alexander Volkanovski has been knocked out cold in back-to-back fights. Now, the shots that Volk is getting hit with really isn't a sign of like having bad durability. Like No one is eating that head kick from Islam Makhachev. No one is eating just that nuclear right hand of Ilia Topuria, but it's the effect of those shots, right? He's been put out cold in back-to-back fights. If Diego Lopes lands a big hook, is Volk going to be just out cold? Is he going to be hurt? Those are serious questions we have going into this matchup. I talked about how Paddy Pimblett keeps his chin up. Volkanovski likes to retreat with his chin in the air. We saw that in the Ilia Topuria fight. And Diego Lopes is someone who throws big hooks in combination. He throws kind of just these like longer combos where he's just nuking power shots at you. And if Volk has his chin up in the air, Diego Lopes is very live to catch him. Now, Volk is obviously the way more technical striker. He has the elite proven cardio, someone who's been 5 rounds a ton of times and has been 5 rounds against guys who do have great cardio, Max 3 times, Ortega. Like, we know his cardio is top tier. If this one's going into the later rounds, I think you heavily favor Volk to win the championship rounds. And if like chin and power were equal, I think Volk completely runs through Diego Lopes, but those are not equal in this matchup. And so I'm actually leaning towards Diego Lopes here. I'm worried about the durability of an aging fighter. So I'm going to go with Diego Lopes, round 1 knockout. I do understand that this could look foolish if Lopes doesn't get the early finish and then he's just like thoroughly losing rounds, but I think Lopes catches him. I'm going round 1. But that is going to wrap it up for my full card predictions. Let me know your thoughts down below. Drop your picks. Thank you all for stopping by, and I'll see you in the next one.